Brazil produces some good footballers. Okay, that's an understatement. Some of the greatest players we have ever witnessed have hailed from Brazil. It's no surprise then that the majority of European clubs have their scouts scouring the country in the hopes of unearthing the next Pele, Roberto Carlos, Ronaldo, Kaka or Neymar. But for every Vinicius Junior or Gabriel Martineli that is discovered, there are countless others who fail to live up to their hype and struggle to make a mark in Europe. The reasons for this are obviously varied and complex, and in this video I will name the 6 players who I believe are the most overhyped to come out of Brazil in recent times, and try to answer why their careers didn't match the early buzz surrounding them. Carlos shot to fame in 2005 after lighting up the South American Under-17 Championships in Venezuela. He was the top scorer in that competition with a phenomenal 8 goals in 7 matches as the young Brazilians won the tournament. His unbelievable dribbling skills, replete with entertaining flicks and tricks, drew immediate comparisons to Ronaldinho. Not only that, but he had a great first touch, great pace, a wicked shot, and he sure knew where the back of the net was. But it was none of these qualities which captured global attention. In many ways, Carlos was the first real internet football superstar, as in December of 2005, a grainy 40-second 240p clip entitled Carlos, the seal dribble, was uploaded to YouTube. It shows 2 instances of Carlos' trademark move, where he flicks the ball up and advances up the field and through crowds of defenders by keeping it aloft with his head. In both instances on the video, his sublime trick is brought to an end by furious defenders who elbow or kick him. Digital football fans lost their minds over this kid. What interests me most about this video is its description. He's the hottest property in Brazilian football, a great free kick taker, and has an amazing ability in balancing a ball on his head. He's only 17 years old and plays for Cruzeiro, touted to inherit the number 10 from Ronaldinho in the coming years. An ankle injury stopped him from putting on what would doubtless have been a marvellous show at the 2005 Under-17 World Cup in October. It was not just football fans on YouTube whose interest was piqued, as many big clubs fancied the youngster. However, he decided to stay in Brazil with his boyhood club. And while no doubt a fan favourite for his flamboyant showmanship, a consistent end product was not forthcoming. In addition to this, defenders in the Brazilian top flight were frequently incensed with the perceived humiliation being doled out by the teenager, and he was targeted on the pitch. The worst example of this came in September 2007. Carlos went for his signature seal dribble in a fiery derby with Atlético Mineiro. He managed just 3 bounces before a furious Diego Coelho flattened him with a sickening elbow. The Mineiro defender was sent off and banned for 120 days. When you have as much flair as Carlos did, there can be a fine line between entertaining the crowd and straight up embarrassing your opponent. Carlos perhaps crossed this line with his persistent seal dribbling. In 2008, he suffered a debilitating ligament tear which would have a profound effect on his career. He really was never the same. A £1.9 million deal to take him to Inter Milan was struck in 2008, but he officially moved to Chievo first, so as not to take up Inter's quota of foreign players. Injuries again plagued the youngster, who managed just 4 Serie A appearances before officially joining Inter on a 3-year contract in 2009. He was immediately loaned out to Ajax. For reasons unknown, despite being 21, he spent the year turning out for their reserves. Perhaps they made an assessment on him when he arrived and didn't like what they saw. Whatever the case was, a couple of valuable years of potential growth and development were squandered through injury or failure to play at the appropriate level. 2 more seasons of loans back in Brazil did nothing more to help him recapture the magic of his breakout years, and when he was released from Inter in 2012 without ever having pulled on their jersey, it's fair to say there wasn't exactly a queue of clubs biting his hand off. He had a nomadic career from this point on, spending a couple of years in the Japan Football League, the 4th tier of Japanese football with Fujieda, where he actually did okay, scoring 9 in 22 appearances before having short stints in America, Malta, Brazil and finally Slovakia before his injury-ravaged body couldn't take anymore and he retired aged 29. Carlos brought great joy to countless football lovers in the early days of his career with his audacious skills. However, unlike Ronaldinho, who had bags of tricks as well, he never quite learned the fine line between using them to help the team or to humiliate the opponent. Perhaps he would have done, but rotten luck with injuries really robbed him of that chance and the opportunity to become the star of football it looked for all the world like he was destined to be back in 2005. Kjæresen burst onto the scene in 2007 as he became Coritiba's top scorer in Serie B with 12 goals. This was the tally which helped his team gain promotion to the Brazilian top flight. In his debut season at the top of the Brazilian footballing pyramid, a 20-year-old Kjæresen exceeded all expectations, scoring 21 goals in the Serie A, 41 in all competitions, as he broke a record for being the youngest ever top scorer in the competition. This tally included 4 goals against Santos in a 5-1 thrashing of them in August, after scoring a hat-trick against them away from home earlier in the season. He was an intelligent and instinctive poacher, and his prowess in the box, first touch, ability to score a variety of goals, including headers, saw him touted as being the next Romario. Comparisons to Ronaldo were also made, as the youngster was nicknamed K9. Needless to say, there was much excitement around him in his homeland, and a move to one of the big boys beckoned as he joined Palmeiras. He picked up where he had left off, scoring 11 goals for the Sao Paulo Giants. With his impressive goal-scoring antics, he was being eyed by some of the biggest clubs in Europe. Rafa Benitez was keen to bring the prolific striker to Anfield in the hopes of forming a fruitful partnership with Fernando Torres. His heart, however, was set on Spain. Since I was little, I have always identified myself with one particular country and one great club. I have nothing against the other teams, but I have always seen myself playing for Barcelona. I have watched Romario and Ronaldo play for them in the past, and that made me aspire to want to play for a great club like Barca. I have also dreamed about playing alongside someone like Lionel Messi one day. In July 2009, it seemed that Kjæresen would have to dream no longer, as Barcelona forked out 14 million euros to sign him from Palmeiras. It was something of a messy saga for the Brazilian club, which resulted in the sacking of their boss, Vanderlei Luxemburgo, who was publicly furious at the way the business was being conducted. It was words from his new gaffer Pep Guardiola though, which should have set alarm bells ringing. The club had decided to sign him. In principle, he'll go out on loan. I won't be counting on him for this season. Yeah, that doesn't sound like it was the gaffer's signing. Indeed, it would be revealed later that Barca president Laporte had bought the wonder kid with the sole intention of loaning him out and selling him on for a profit if he impressed. So, only 6 days after arriving at the new camp, he was again on his travels, this time to Portugal, and a seasons-long loan to Benfica. Why the board at Barca thought that this was the place for Kjæresen to bag the goals in Europe needed to drum up some interest in his services is beyond me. Benfica already had Oscar Cardozo, Javier Saviola, Nuno Gomes and Weldon on their books, proven strikers with experience at the highest levels and goals on their resume. There was no way an undoubtedly talented but raw youngster was going to force his way into the first team. He only managed 5 appearances in the Liga Portugal without scoring before he was recalled from his loan in January. A second loan move for the last leg of the 09-10 season followed, this time to Fiorentina. He was used primarily as a sub, making 10 Serie A appearances, only 2 of which were starts, totaling a paltry 282 minutes. He scored only 2 goals, a late equaliser against Lazio and the opener against Inter. Barca looked like they were ready to cut their losses on him already and opted not to experiment with a loan to another European side, agreeing a temporary deal with Santos back in Brazil. After a tumultuous year, Kjæresen sadly looked to be a spent force at the age of only 22 and was unable to recreate the goal-scoring heroics which had taken him to Barcelona. He quickly found himself on the sidelines, which is where he had to watch as new kid on the block Neymar took Santos to Copa Libertadores victory. Another loan to another Brazilian side, Cruzeiro, only succeeded in compounding the falling star's misery as he ruptured the ACL in his right knee. Barcelona terminated his contract in 2014. Kjæresen had failed to make a single appearance for the Blaugrana and pretty much fell off the map records-wise in 2018, playing in the Brazilian Serie B with Londrina. The tale of the new Romario is in the end a sad one. He fell victim to a greedy and ill-conceived transfer policy and was treated as little more than stock. The Barcelona board seemed to have scant regard to the fact that this was a human being they were dealing with, one who had dreamt of following in the footsteps of his idols Romario and Ronaldo since he was a boy. No thought was given to where he should be loaned out to in what was a key stage of his footballing development, leading him to regress as a player. The crushing disappointment of his dream turning into a living hell was one which Kjæresen never got over. Add in some awful injuries and it's clear why he never lived up to the massive early hype. João Alves de Assis Silva joined Corinthians Academy as an 8-year-old. This is where he got his nickname, with the coach telling him that Joe was a better name for a real striker than João. In June 2003, at the age of 16, he became the youngest ever player to make an appearance for the club, and a month later, he became the youngest to ever score for them. The youngster would spend 3 seasons in the first team, scoring 17 in 106 appearances in all competitions. During this time, there was significant interest from Europe in the highly promising striker. In the end, he joined Russian giant CSKA CSKA Moscow for $3.5 million in 2006. He made a scoring debut in the Russian Cup last 16 in March, and just 2 weeks later, he showed the fans what he could really do, scoring 4 against Shinnik in the league. He never looked back after that and banged in the goals at a frightening rate, scoring 44 and assisting 10 in 77 appearances in all competitions. If there had been interest about the youngster's potential while at Corinthians, then the excitement had increased tenfold after he showed he could quickly adapt to the climate and competition in the European League. In the end, it was Manchester City who won the race for him, smashing their previous transfer record of £13 million that they had spent on Nicolas Anelka and splashing out a reported £18 million to bring him to the club. New manager Mark Hughes was buzzing. He's a big talent and a young man with a big future. A lot has been said about him, and there was a big expectation on him coming out of Brazil. So with the success he's had, I think it's a real coup that we've been able to bring him to the club. He's a big guy in stature and in ability, so I think everyone will be able to enjoy watching him play. He really was a marquee signing, and that summer should have been all about him. However, on September 1st, 2008, after a reported 3 weeks of negotiations, the Abu Dhabi group successfully completed the takeover of Manchester City. The transfer window was still open, and the new owners wasted no time in flexing their financial muscles, stunning the Premier League with the marquee signing of Galactico Robinho from Real Madrid for £33 million to usher in the Sheikh Mansour era. Joe who, sorry? Admittedly, he made a decent start to life for Man City, assisting Sean Wright-Phillips on his Premier League debut in the 3-0 victory over Sunderland. He scored 2 against Omonia in the UEFA Cup, and a few days later bagged his first goal in the Prem in the 6-0 rout of Portsmouth. Results and performances on the pitch rapidly deteriorated, and Joe stopped contributing in the attacking third, so he found himself on the bench and shunted to the sidelines, and eventually shipped out to Everton on loan in the winter window as the arrival of Craig Bellamy further increased competition for minutes. He began life with a bang, scoring 2 and assisting 1 in his debut against Bolton. Again, he struggled to kick on from a positive start and failed to show the kind of consistency that he had in Russia, scoring just 3 over the next 11 games. David Moyes was apparently happy enough with what the big man offered him up front and agreed to take him back to Goodison the following season on loan. He was pretty rubbish and simply did not look like a Premier League quality striker, failing to score a single goal in 16 league matches. I really don't think Moyes needed a reason to cut the loan short, but the Brazilian gave him one anyway, making an unauthorised return to Brazil over Christmas. He was suspended for breach of contract and sent back to Man City. Clearly not impressed with the increasingly disappointing Joe, City loaned him straight to Galatasaray on the same day that he had returned from Everton. 3 goals and 15 appearances were not enough to convince the Turkish giants to try and sign him on a permanent deal. Returning to Man City, the arrivals of Mario Balotelli and Edin Dzeko saw him slip further down the pecking order. He managed just 12 league appearances, totaling 340 minutes, once more failing to find the back of the net. In the summer of 2011, oil-rich Man City waved goodbye to their near £20 million investment by terminating his contract. He returned to Brazil to play for Internacional, where he was not successful. It was only when he joined Atlético Mineiro that he rediscovered some form. He struck up a good relationship with Ronaldinho and bagged 10 goals. Ronaldinho and Joe did not only click on the pitch, as they were also drinking buddies, and Joe's difficult relationship with alcohol worsened, reaching a low following the disastrous 2014 World Cup in Brazil. Spiraling out of control, he went a year without finding the net. In 2015, moves to Saudi Arabia and then China helped him to turn his life around, and when he rejoined Corinthians in 2017, he was sober and in the best form of his life. At the age of 30, he scored 18 goals and was named Brazil's Player of the Year as he helped his boyhood club win the Serie A. After this, he had a 2-year stint in the J-League, where he enjoyed his highest ever goal-scoring season, bagging 24 in 2018. Joe returned to Corinthians and retired in 2021, aged 35. While there is definitely something to be said of the poor timing involving his transfer to Man City and subsequently being cast into the shadows following their megabucks takeover and arrival of Robinho, Joe was given a fair crack of the whip at Everton and showed himself to be some way below the standard to make it in the Premier League. His off-field issues, personal demons, and battle with alcoholism undoubtedly affected his performances. It sounds crazy to say now, given the wildly different paths their careers have taken, but 15 years ago, Ganso was considered to be as good and as promising a prospect as Neymar. Both were products of the Santos Youth Academy. Being the elder of the two, Ganso made his debut for Santos in 2008, a season before Neymar would burst onto the scene. Ganso would only manage 6 appearances that year though. A versatile, skillful, elegant and unflappable player, he could occupy all positions across midfield. His excellent vision, passing range and general play style drew drew early comparisons with Kaka. These standout attributes made him first choice in 2009 as he made 45 appearances in all competitions, scoring 9 goals. The following year, the hype in Brazil reached mania level. Ganso had enjoyed his first success, helping his team to win the Copa Brazil and being named player of the tournament in the process. Ganso and Santos also triumphed in the regional league, the Campeonato Paulista. Brazil icon Socrates claimed that Ganso was the future of Brazil and the best player of the current generation. The general public seemed to agree. Alongside Neymar, who had scored 42 goals in all competitions that season, there was a manic surge of support for the two prodigies to be selected by Dunga for the 2010 World Cup in South Africa. The national team head coach ultimately decided to go with proven talent, and the precocious pair remained at home. Success continued to come for Ganso over the following 2 years, winning the regional championship a further 2 times in 2011 and 2012, the Recopa Sudamérica also in 2012, and the Holy Grail, the Copa Libertadores in 2011. And while the buzz surrounding him and his close friend Neymar still existed, it was no longer vibrating on the same frequency. It was clear that Neymar was on a totally different level and streets ahead of not just Ganso, but everyone else in the country. The media, of course, gleefully pounced upon the widening gap emerging between the two players, who were once considered equals. So close off the pitch were they that Ganso was present at the birth of Neymar's son and is the boy's godfather. Nasty reports began to get written that Ganso was bitterly jealous of his increasingly more famous friend, rumours which the player denied. So why had Neymar kicked on in ways Ganso simply hadn't? Well, there had always been questions over the midfielder's work rate and commitment, as he was branded lazy by some. A cruciate ligament rupture he suffered in 2010, which caused him to miss 28 games, would seem to me to be the main culprit though. Never the most dynamic or mobile of players to begin with, this injury further limited his pace and movement. Their disparity between the two pals grew even more when it came to choosing their next destination in football. Despite alleged interest from both of the Milan giants, Ganso took the apparently less adventurous option and completed a £7 million dream move to Sao Paulo. Less than a year later, and Neymar had gone to try and conquer Europe with Barcelona. Ganso endured poor form and limited success in his first couple of seasons with Sao Paulo, failing to pick up any more caps for Brazil and seemingly falling off the wish list of the European giants. The arrivals of Kaka and Alexander Pato in 2014 brought the best out of Ganso, and he started to look like a player again. He had kept free from injuries too, and in 2016 he finally got given the chance to prove himself in Europe with a move to La Liga to join Sevilla. On arrival, Ganso said, "I know I have to work hard. I come to Sevilla with a will to win titles. At 26 years of age, I see myself as prepared to make the jump and do it well." These words would come back to haunt him, as it quickly became clear that he was operating at a level way below what was required for success in Europe. He was too slow and not quick enough to react, so defences had an easy time playing against him. As Clarence Seedorf said, Brazilian football with its deep-lying defences gave Ganso plenty of space. The zone of the pitch where he likes to operate, behind the strikers, is much more crowded in the more compact football of Europe. In other words, Ganso was a luxury that Sevilla couldn't afford, as he looked incapable of producing game-winning moments. He managed just 27 appearances across 2 seasons before he took a massive step down in the form of a loan to French Ligue 1 strugglers Amiens in 2018. He was hugely disappointing there, again failing to contribute meaningfully as the team finished just 4 points above the relegation zone. In 2019, Ganso returned to Brazil with his tail between his legs, having failed to show why there was such massive hype surrounding him at the start of that decade. He joined Fluminense, who he still plays for now at the age of 33. For me, Ganso is an example of a player who got caught up in his own hype. The low standard of opposition he was facing had fans convinced that he was a superstar, and his self-declared furious reaction to being snubbed for the 2010 World Cup shows that he believed it too. Alas, this translated to him never putting in the hard work or adapting his game to the level required to succeed at the very top. Before the 1998 World Cup, superstar Inter Milan striker Ronaldo Nazario predicted that his Brazil teammate Vinicius would be the star of the tournament. Perhaps this was a tactic to deflect attention away from himself, but then again maybe not, because there was a whole lot of hype surrounding the left winger at that point, and rightly so. He had been tearing up the Brazilian Serie A, with defenders having no response for his supremely silky skills, and he was registering an assist every other game. He was considered to be the most exciting talent in his homeland, the next Rivaldo, and heir apparent to revolution Marcelino's throne. He was blossoming on the international stage as well. He put in some electric performances in the 1997 Copa America, the most eye-catching of which came in the final against Bolivia, as he assisted every goal of Brazil's 3-1 victory. Rounding out a good year 6 months later, he played every game, managing 1 goal and 2 assists as Brazil won the 1997 Confederations Cup. He continued to feature for the national team in the run-up to France '98, and while his wonderful dribbling or the entertainment value of the multitude of skill moves he could perform, most notably his signature step-over, could not be questioned, his end product most certainly could. For a winger that so many defenders struggled to contain, the rarity of his goals or assists for the Seleção was puzzling. This did not appear to alarm or deter Spanish side Real Betis though. Before the World Cup, they decided to make him the world's most expensive player, spending £21.5 million on him, $2 million more than the previous record transfer which took compatriot Ronaldo to Inter. So confident was Betis president Manuel Ruiz de Lopera that Denilson was going to be the man to turn them into a footballing powerhouse that he signed him to a mammoth 10-year contract worth 40 grand a week. Denilson featured in every game at the World Cup, failing to score but providing 2 assists. He was used predominantly as a sub, and this is how he was deployed in the final, replacing Leonardo at half-time but ultimately failing to change the course of history as Brazil lost 3-0 to France. Although Denilson's arrival at Betis raised their profile in the game, it had the opposite effect on the field. Moments of jaw-dropping magic aside, it quickly became apparent that Elasticals did not translate to lots of goals, that his stepovers and spins did not equate to points and wins. His brand of wing play quickly became outdated as coaches started to experiment with inside forwards or inverted wingers, and the awfully one-footed Denilson simply could not adapt and looked horribly out of his depth, denied the luxury of time and space he was afforded in Brazil. He managed just 5 goals and 0 assists across 67 league appearances in his first 2 seasons, a shocking return which saw his team relegated in 2000. Real Betis managed to return to La Liga at the first time of asking, an achievement to which Denilson contributed little. He was a first-team stalwart throughout the 01-02 season, appearing in all 38 league matches, with only 1 of those coming from the bench. It makes sense, they have broken records and their bank account on the tricky Brazilian. They had to at least get some work out of their investment, and while his divine dribbling still had the capacity to excite, entertain and leave La Liga legends like Carlos Puyol on their arses, he continued to be confusingly toothless in the attacking third. He was called up to the Brazil squad for the 2002 World Cup, where he was used exclusively as a sub, appearing for a solitary minute for the final against Germany, which his team won 2-0. Over the next 3 seasons, he would continue to frustrate in a Betis shirt, also finding himself frozen out of the national team before he was sold to Bordeaux in Ligue 1 for an undisclosed fee in 2005. As laughable as it sounds, he enjoyed one of his most productive seasons in Europe that year, with a truly phenomenal 3 goals and 3 assists. Quite rightly, he was no longer coveted by the best European clubs who would have been able to afford his crazy wages, so he followed the money to Saudi Arabia and then the MLS. The final nail in the coffin of the man who was once the most expensive footballer on earth came in 2009, when after going on trial with Bolton for a week, they decided against taking him on permanently. Boss Gary Megson talked up his attitude and professionalism, and it was clear that this was a decision made on a purely footballing basis. There are other parts of his game that we didn't feel we would be able to use to our advantage and would be able to complement everyone else. In other words, he simply wasn't good enough. So while it may come across as blasphemous to cast aspersions on the career of a World Cup winner, I think it is warranted in this case. He sold the footballing world a dream with his performances in Brazil and earned himself a decade-long mega contract which stuck him with the label of priciest footballer in the world. All along, he knew he was never good enough to live up to those expectations. He was more than happy to sit on the bench or please the masses with his stepovers, as long as the money was coming in. But when push came to shove, he offered precious little else. At the number 1 spot is Robinho. Thus far, we've looked at Brazilian wonder kids who earned early comparisons to past greats like Ronaldinho, Ronaldo, or Rivelino. In the early 2000s, Robinho was likened to the GOAT, the king, and unanimously hailed as the next Pele. Indeed, the great man himself even anointed a 15-year-old Robinho as his heir apparent, his hand-picked successor. And it's easy to see why, as the young prodigy ticked all the boxes. Like Pele, he played for Santos. Making his first team debut in 2002 at the age of 18, he took to the Brazilian Brazilian top flight instantly. With a maturity and intelligence that belied his tender years, he put in some ludicrously good performances, helping his team to the Brazilian Serie A title. 2 years later, and he would repeat the feat in more spectacular fashion, scoring 21 goals in 35 league appearances on the way to another domestic crown. Not only that, but Robinho was the image of Pele in terms of build and proportions, and to top it all off, he was an attacker, fulfilling a similar type of role that Pele used to, mounting his assault on the defence from deeper positions. Robinho was lightning quick, a brilliant dribbler of the ball, had a nose for goal, and was winning plaudits and personal accolades every year. Needless to say, the bright lights of European football beckoned, and his destination was one fitting of the new Pele. Real Madrid paid €25 million to bring him to the Bernabeu in 2005, and he was given the number 10 shirt vacated by Luis Figo. He announced himself with a stunning La Liga debut performance, where he looked worthy of all the insane hype and lofty comparisons which had followed him out of Brazil. He came on in the 70th minute against Cadiz, with the score tied at 1-1. He injected energy, creativity and flair into his team, and with a stunning array of tricks, helped them to win. The commentator described Robinho's performance as pure poetry, and El Mundo proclaimed that a star had been born. His was a star which flickered throughout the season, but never fully shone, as he notched up 8 goals and 7 assists in his debut campaign. Not a terrible return by any means, but not the phenomenal numbers that players like Ronaldo, Romario or even Rivaldo put up in their debut seasons in Spain. Indeed, there were those who thought that Robinho looked more likely to end up being the next Denilson rather than the new Pele, taking notice of the fact that his dribbles and bicicleta would often result in zilch. In his second season for the club, he started off brightly, then fell off and was anonymous midway through before finishing off strongly, playing a vital role in Madrid's excellent late season form, which saw them charge up the table to finish first. However, there was a feeling amongst many that he just wasn't going to cut it at Madrid, with his off-field party boy lifestyle and love of the Madrid nightlife having a role to play, as he often turned up to training reeking of booze. At the beginning of next season, he missed a training session, having returned from international duty with Brazil a day late after spending a raucous night in the Catwalk Club. He was dropped from the squad, and it seemed like his Madrid career was over. Instead, it sparked a remarkable resurgence, as he scored 9 in his first 7 games back in the team. It turned out to be his best season in a Madrid shirt, as he helped Los Blancos keep their hands on La Liga. That summer, as I mentioned earlier on in the video, he moved to Man City in a £33 million deal on the last day of the window. Just like at Madrid, he enjoyed a debut which seemed to show that the price tag and insane hype around his signing was warranted, scoring a brilliant free kick after 11 minutes against Chelsea. It was a debut that demonstrates this is a genuine superstar, gushed The Guardian the next day, and his final season tally of 14 league goals and 5 assists would appear to be extremely decent, but they don't tell the full story of that campaign. Yes, he scored freely against the Blackburn, Stokes and Hulls of the league, but only managed 2 against top 4 sides, the aforementioned strike against Chelsea and 1 against Arsenal. He was wildly inconsistent, and just as he had done at Madrid, went missing right in the middle of the season, enduring a 17-game scoring drought in all competitions from January to March. That torturous barren spell came after an unsanctioned trip back to Brazil for a crazy party to celebrate his birthday. He missed a good chunk of game time due to injury at the start of the following season. They didn't exactly miss him, as he was woeful when on the pitch, failing to score in any of his 10 league appearances before being sent on loan to Santos. In 2010, Man City sold Robinho to AC Milan for less than half what they paid for him 2 years previously. He showed why there had once been such a buzz around him, scoring 14 league goals as Milan won the Serie A. That was as good as it got for him in Italy, as his infamous inconsistency reared his ugly head and he scored just 11 goals across the following 3 seasons. No doubt his despicable actions off the pitch were distracting him from his game. It was now 2014, and the early suggestions of him being the next Pele now seemed grotesque, heinous and laughable, something summed up by his return to Santos, which was far from the success of his early years. What followed were less than spectacular spells in China, Brazil and Turkey. Back in 2002, I doubt anyone would have bet against Robinho having a career as distinguished as Pele. Alas, an inability to consistently deliver at the highest levels, coupled with a legendary love of partying, meant that while he enjoyed some success and won a decent amount of silverware, not many people will be keen on mentioning him in the same breath as Pele nowadays. Honourable mentions go to Alexander Pato, Anderson, Lucas Moura, Philip Coutinho, Kleberson, Giovanni, Lucas Leiva and Renato Augusto. So let me know in the comments, what do you think of my list? Do you have anyone different on yours?